Hi everyone, it's Maria from Creative Grids, and today I've got a tiny little diamond to share with you. This is a 60-degree diamond ruler from Krista Moser, and it can cut parts up to 3.5 inches wide from strips or solids, your choice. Let's take a look at what this tiny little diamond can do. So I'm going to gather the parts that I need to cut some diamonds first. I'm going to need our ruler, my rotary cutter, and I'm choosing my rotating mat because I'm cutting from strips, so it's going to be easy to turn it around if I need to cut from the other side. Because I am right-handed, I'm going to start with the ruler in this position. You can see I've got a 3.5 inch strip. I want a 3.5 inch diamond. And see that little knockoff on the top? I'm going to trim that off so there's no little extra triangles in my diamonds when I go to piece them all together. Turn that mat around. And cut on that other side and the tip as well. Now I can just keep placing that ruler right on that strip and cut however many I need from that 3.5 inch strip. You want to see what the 2.5 inch strips will look like? I'm going to start with the same tools again, but a 2.5 inch strip this time. And to lay this on, just like that. Can you see those little 2.5 inch marks right there? That shows me I'm going to get a 2.5 inch diamond when I'm done. Turn that mat around. Now, you want to move that ruler. You don't want to leave it lay just like that because it's a smaller size. So turn it around and line up those 2.5 inch marks with the edges of the strip, just like that. I've got 2.5, 2.5 with the tail already cut off. A little bit of pressure and that diamond's not going anywhere while I cut. And there I go. Look at the difference in size, but how fun is that? And last but not least, let's look at a 1.5 inch strip. I cut this one a little bit shorter because it's smaller, but I'm going to do that same thing. Look for the 1.5 inch marks. Line it up on that 1.5 inch strip. Remember, with our grip, you can move it around till you're in position. A little bit of pressure, it shouldn't go anywhere. Reposition the ruler so that you've got the 1.5 inch marks lined up. And just like that, I have got some 1.5 inch, 2.5 inch, and 3.5 inch diamonds. Next, let's take a look at cutting 60-degree triangles. I'm going to start with my 3.5 inch strip again. I'm going to find the 3.5 inch marks here on the ruler. Line those and the top of that triangle up with the edges of the strip. Cut on one side and this little tail. Rotate the cutting mat around and cut on the other side. And I have got a 60-degree triangle, which means all the sides are the same and the angles are all the same on all 3 corners. So, same rule goes for the smaller strips. So I'm going to start with that strip that I've already cut a diamond from, and look at this neat little trick. I'm going to find that 2.5 inch markings, line them up on the edge of the strip and the straight part at the top of the strip. Because I'm right-handed, I'm going to turn that mat around and cut on that other side. If you would like to knock off those sharp little tips, look at this. I'm going to find the 3.5 inch mark, line that up with the bottom of the triangle and the edge, and cut off that little tail. Slide it over to get the other side, and now I've got matching set of triangles. It's just as easy with the 1.5 inch strips. Here's that end that I already made a diamond out of. I'm going to make a 1.5 inch triangle, 1.5 inches, raw edge and raw edge. Turn for safe cutting and trim that off. Same deal for those little edges there. And just like that. Now let's take a look at cutting some hexagons, which happen to be one of my favorite shapes. I'm going to start with that 3.5 inch strip again. I think you can see, but here are the lines for the 3.5 inch hexagon. So I'm going to line the dotted line up here on the raw edge and the dotted line down here on the raw edge and cut that right side. Turn that mat and everything around. A little bit of pressure so it doesn't move, and cut the other side. Isn't that beautiful? For the next one, you would just line it up right on that strip and keep going. If you were planning to sew a bunch of these together, we've got these great little holes right here that you can use to mark those corners and give yourself a spot to anchor to that next one. Same deal goes for the 2.5 inch strips. Remember, I cut my triangle last, but look at this. Here is the smaller hexagon. I'm going to line that up right on that strip. I try not to waste too much because, you know, fabric is pretty precious. But just like that, I'm going to cut. I'm sure I've got a clean edge here. Turn that whole thing around. Reposition your ruler. Now you're going to line up those dotted white lines on the other edge to cut the final two sides of your hexagon. If you want to keep going, you're going to just do that same thing. Make sure the outline for that 2.5 inch isn't on the part that may have gotten cut here, and keep going all the way across your strip. And because they're so cute, let's do a 1.5 inch one too. That is that space right there. Now, personally, I can't imagine actually sewing these together, but I would definitely do some English paper piecing. Clean up that edge. Turn it around. Reposition the ruler. So So with the same tiny diamond, I've got 3.5 inch, 2.5 inch, and 1.5 inch hexagons. Next up, let's take a look at cutting trapezoids. I'm going to start with a 2.5 inch strip. I'm going to line up that 3.5 inch line with the raw edge and cut on that right side. Do you see how this is in between the dotted line and the hang hole or burr mark? Rotate that mat and just leave it all sit there and cut down that other side. To do the next one, I'm simply going to rotate my ruler and line it up with that clean cut we just made and that raw edge down here and cut the next one. The only thing I'm getting rid of are the little tails on the triangles. So there's hardly any waste when you're cutting from strips. And now I'm going to get these perfect shapes every time. If you need more, I'm just going to keep working my way across that strip. Just like that. And for a little sneak peek, sewing those two shapes together will give you a full 60-degree triangle to put into another project. Same technique is going to apply for the 1.5 inch strips. I'm going to line up the 2.5 inch line with that raw edge. So 1.5 inch strip. Add an inch for the line you want to use and trim. You want to knock off those triangles so that they look like this. Reposition that ruler, line up the 3.5 inch line with the bottom raw edge and clip off the tail. Reposition and cut off the other tail. And if you can see, the top of the hexagon for the 2.5 inch is the same shape as what this trapezoid is. So there's a lot of double checks that you can find on the ruler as you work with it. And I think you're going to have a lot of fun working with this one. Now, last but not least, for that final shape that comes with instructions in the insert that you will receive with your ruler, we're going to cut some parallelograms. I'm going to start with my 2.5 inch strip again. Because it's solids, I can do this. And it's right side out. I'm going to turn the diamond this way. Lay it on the strip with that 2.5 inch line on the raw edge. I'm going to jig it over just a little bit and make a clean cut here. I love that we can get those extra little tips out of the way because then when I sew them later, they are so clean and ready to go. I'm going to turn it around and cut that other side. And I'm going to reposition to get rid of those tails. Here's that little hexagon mark again, but there's also stars here to line up that raw edge on so that you know you're straight on that strip. If I want to cut another one, I'm simply going to move it right back onto that strip and cut this side. So because I'm right-handed, I'm starting by cleaning up this side first, and then I'm going to spin it so that I can safely cut the other side. And there is a parallelogram. And not to be outdone, let's do a little 1.5 inch this way. Sometimes I reposition many times before I'm right where I want to be. So I'm going to line up that 1.5 inch mark. First it's a line and then it's 2 stars. So let me know that I'm right on that strip. Clean up the edge. Get rid of the tail. Rotate that mat. Reposition. There is my tiny little parallelogram. Thanks so much for watching today. Be sure to like and follow us on all the social media, and I'll see you all real soon.